Silence can save one person, but sometimes silence can cost an entire nation. An orphan girl lives in a land of exile, then becomes queen, and must face a death decree. A schemer builds a gallows in the night, a reversal as sharp as a blade. The gallows prepared for the righteous becomes the place where the wicked are hanged. And the day appointed for destruction turns into a day of celebration for life. This is the story of Esther. The Persian Empire stretched like a vast carpet from India to Ethiopia. Susa, the capital of the empire, was a place where white marble made light spring up from the ground, where long corridors linked together like a labyrinth, and the scent of spices clung to officials' robes like an invisible kind of power. Above it all stood King Ahasuerus, a man who could change the fate of an entire people with a single wave of his hand. The king wanted the world not only to fear him, but also to admire him. He held a grand banquet that lasted 180 days, gathering nobles, generals, and governors from all the provinces, so they would be drunk on victory and drunk on his wealth as well. Gold gleamed across the feast tables. Cups of wine passed without stopping. Laughter rang out, as if this empire could never collapse. When those days of display ended, the king held another 7-day feast for the people of Susa. Wine makes a person's heart swell, but it often swells in the direction of pride. On the 7th night, when the king's heart was merry with wine, he commanded that Queen Vashti be brought in, wearing her crown, to display her beauty before a room full of drunken men. That was not honor. That was turning a person into a showpiece, and Vashti refused. The king raged. The advisors inflamed political fear. If this spread, women throughout the empire would despise their husbands. An edict was written in anger, and Vashti was deposed, pushed out of the palace, stripped of her crown. The seat beside the throne sat empty, a small emptiness that no one imagined would become the doorway to a great plan. When the anger faded, the emptiness became clear. The officials proposed a solution. Gather the most beautiful young women from across the empire, bring them into the palace, and choose one to be the new queen. In that selection was an orphan girl named Hadassah, whose Persian name was Esther. She was a Jewish woman living in exile. Her parents had died. She had been raised by her older cousin Mordecai, a man who stood at the king's gate, living quietly, yet with loyalty as firm as stone. The day Esther was taken into the palace, Mordecai stood watching for a long time. He could not take her back. He could not protect her. He could not negotiate. All he could do was send her one instruction: do not reveal your identity too quickly. Not out of shame, but because timing could decide life or death. Inside the palace, everything was bright but cold. Other girls competed with jewelry, with words, with ways of making others fade so they could stand out. Esther did not. She did not demand extravagance. She required nothing but what the keeper of the women advised. And strangely, that humility made her loved. Scripture says,
Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. Esther 2:15.
there are favors not meant to make life easier, but to place us exactly where we need to be before the storm arrives. The day Esther went in, the whole palace held its breath. An orphan girl faced a man who could grant life or death with a single look. But the king looked at Esther and chose her. He placed the crown on her head, held a celebration, and distributed gifts throughout the provinces. Esther became queen of Persia, yet her Jewish identity remained hidden. The crown rested on her head, and the truth lay quiet in her heart, like a flame covered with ash. Outside the palace gate, Mordecai still stood there, every day like a guard, not only for the king, but for the fate of the girl he regarded as his own child. One day, he heard two eunuchs speaking of rebellion. They planned to assassinate the king. Mordecai immediately told Esther. Esther reported it to the king and made it clear.
The one who saved the king was Mordecai.
The plot was exposed. The two traitors were hanged. Mordecai's deed was recorded in the royal chronicles, then forgotten. The book closed. The story seemed finished, but that very forgotten record would become the hook that would turn the whole empire. Then Haman appeared, promoted by the king to high rank, with power second only to the king. Everyone who met him had to bow. Bowing was not only etiquette, it was the language of survival in the palace. But Mordecai did not bow. not because he wanted conflict, but because he knew the boundary he bowed only before God. And pride always hates most the one who refuses to worship it. Haman was so furious that he did not want to kill only one man. When he learned Mordecai was Jewish, he turned the humiliation of his ego into a plan to wipe out a people. He came to the king with false loyalty, speaking of a people who lived by different laws, who disturbed order, who did not deserve tolerance. He offered silver, he offered reasons, and the king, in the indifference of power, took off his ring and gave it to him. The death decree was signed, sealed, and sent throughout the empire in every language. A day was set. On that day, the Jews' men, women, and children were not only to be killed, but wiped out. Susa shook. The Jews put on sackcloth, scattered ashes, and wept. Mordecai also wore sackcloth and cried out loudly near the palace. The news reached Esther. She sent him fine clothes to replace his sackcloth, as if she wanted to pull him out of grief. But he refused. He sent her the truth and a demand she could not avoid. She had to go to the king and plead for her people. Esther trembled because Persian law was clear. Anyone who entered uninvited would be put to death unless the king extended the golden scepter. And for 30 days, the king had not called for her. That meant she could not be sure she still had favor. She could walk in and never walk out. Mordecai sent this message.
Who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this?
Esther 4:14. Esther understood that her position was not meant for safety, but for the salvation of her people. She said,
Let everyone fast and pray for 3 days. Then I will go in to the king even if I must die. Must die, I accept it.
3 days of fasting. The city was silent, as if holding its breath. In the palace, Esther prepared not only with royal garments, but with a heart already placed on the altar. On the 3rd day, she stepped into the inner court. The stone pillars stood like judges. The guards stared straight ahead. The throne was before her. One step meant life, one step meant death. She stepped forward. The king lifted his head and saw her. The moment stretched like a lifetime. Then he extended the golden scepter. Esther touched the tip and lived. The king asked her,
What does the queen want? Even half the kingdom, and I will give it.
No one understood what was happening, but scripture is always true. The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. As the rivers of water, he turneth it whithersoever he will. Proverbs 21:1. Esther knew that to overturn a scheme, she had to bring the schemer into the right light. She smiled.
If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come to the banquet I have prepared.
That night they feasted. The king asked again. Esther invited them to another banquet the next day. But in truth, she was waiting for God's timing, because she knew some plans can only be revealed at the moment God appoints. Haman left the banquet puffed up with self-satisfaction. But as he passed the gate, he saw Mordecai still standing upright. Pride turned into poison. That night, Haman built a tall gallows, so that in the morning he could ask the king to hang Mordecai on it. He slept with victory clenched in his hand. But that night, the king could not sleep. He ordered the chronicles to be read. And among thousands of lines, one detail appeared. Mordecai, the man who saved the king's life, has never been rewarded. A deed that seemed small, a detail that seemed forgotten. But God did not forget. For he that avengeth blood remembereth them. He forgetteth not the cry of the humble. Psalm 9:12. The next morning, Haman entered the palace to ask for Mordecai's execution. But before he could speak, the king asked first,
What shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor?
Haman thought it was about him. He suggested royal robes, the king's horse, and a public parade of honor. The king nodded, do so, for Mordecai. Haman had to lead the horse for the man he wanted to kill, and with his own mouth proclaim honor for his enemy. The gallows still stood, but Haman had already been hanged in his pride by humiliation. Then came the second banquet. The king asked again,
Queen Esther, what is your request?
and this time Esther rose and revealed what she had hidden.
Please spare my life and the lives of my people. For we have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and wiped out.
The room froze. The king flared with anger.
Who would dare do such a thing?
Esther turned. This enemy, Haman. The room hardened into silence. Haman's face went pale. He fell down, begging. When the king returned and saw Haman collapsed near Esther, the sentence was sealed. In that moment, the man who thought himself strongest understood he had nothing. The decree he had written to kill the Jews became the judgment hanging over his own life. Haman was executed hanged on the very gallows he had built to kill Mordecai. The gallows prepared for the righteous became the place where the schemer was hanged. But the death decree still remained because Persian law could not be revoked. So the king gave his ring to Mordecai to write a new decree allowing the Jews the right to defend themselves. And wherever the decree was read, Jewish eyes suddenly shone brighter. Children's footsteps ran along the streets. Mothers wiped their tears. They did not know exactly what tomorrow would look like, but at least they knew they had a chance. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Psalm 35. The appointed day drew near, and the enemies of the Jews prepared. But this time, they were not facing powerless people. They faced a nation strengthened by faith. The Jews rose up. Shouts rang through the cities. Yet inside every Jewish home, there was something else calm. Not because they were stronger, but because they knew,
If God be for us, who can be against us? Romans 8:31.
the enemies who once mocked them now fled. Haman's sons fell in battle, and the day of death became the day of life. From then on, they established the Feast of Purim to remember that fear can be reversed and a nation can be saved by the courage of one person who chose not to remain silent. There are decrees in life that are not written on paper, but written through pressure, fear, and the habit of avoiding. Esther's story reminds us that God can use the exact place where a person is standing, even when that person once believed everything was accidental, to protect others and reverse what seems impossible. Sometimes a crown is not for being served, but for serving. Sometimes silence is no longer wisdom, but becomes sin. If this story has touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. We spend a great deal of time writing, producing, and telling these Bible stories in a vivid and emotional way, and your support is the greatest motivation for us to continue. If God has ever turned your fear into courage, share your testimony below and leave the Bible character you want to hear next.